Okay, so the CFC, the Combined Federal Campaign Program, was established in 1961 by executive order. Hopefully, everyone in this room and watching online is aware of what the CFC program is all about, but we do get questions occasionally from charities wanting to know, well, what do you do? What is this about? So the CFC program is an opportunity for charities to attend charity fairs, be listed in our charity list for federal donors to be able to donate to your organization. So one of the benefits to donating through the CFC for a lot of federal employees is that we can do that through our payroll. So payroll deductions, which is a really big deal. So if I were to give you, if you asked me for money right now, I probably would give you $20, but if I have the ability to spread that out over 26 period, 26 biweekly period, I would probably, bi-monthly period, I might do that. It's the only government authorized solicitation of employees in the federal workplace. So unless it's during the CFC campaign period, which started this year, early September, and it will end January 11th, charities are not allowed to solicit federal employees during federal time or at the workplace via email, via the government email and or such. It's overseen by our office here at OPM. It's a staff of 7. Today I'm joined by Gwen Savage. She's one of the operations specialists. Anthony DeCristofaro is in the back. He's the deputy CFC director and senior compliance specialist. Outside the auditorium, I think Rashard Adams is out there, and he's one of our staff assistants. And not here today is Charlize Adams, another staff assistant. Keith Willingham, who's the director of the program, and Marcus Glasgow, who's also an operations specialist. So since the program was established, the program has raised over $8 billion. So it is still the most successful workplace giving program in the world. So the reason why you're here today is because the annual, did you change it? Okay. The process to be a CFC charity is an annual process. It's not you apply once and you're in the program forever. You do need to apply once a year. And what that looks like, it could be different based on what group you fall in, and we'll talk about that, but it is an annual process. On our agenda today, we'll go over the advisory statements, how to set up your account, the documents that are required with your CFC application, the application process, and different follow-on tasks such as signing, unsigning, editing, paying for your application fee and your listing fee, and other requirements of the application process. So just to give a very high-level overview of the application process, it is online. It's an online application. Please do not send us a paper application. Even though we're in the 3rd year of the online application, we still get paper applications. We do not accept paper applications. We return them to you, and if you miss the deadline because you sent us a paper application, sorry, but that's not on us. I mentioned the group situation. So one of the changes that happened with the regulations, the regulatory changes in 2016 that were implemented in 2016 is that now, although you still need to apply to the program every year, you're only required to submit a full application once every 3 years. And then in the other 2 years is a short application. So we'll talk a little bit more about the differences between the full application and the online full application and the verification application, but one of the two is required at least once every 3 years. And another big thing that I do want to stress is the application process is a 2-step process. So right now, you're here to submit the initial application. So for your information, the application period opens up this Saturday, December 1st, and it will extend all the way to January 31st, 2019. So it's open for a 60-day period. So in the first 2 years of this new system, we did give deadlines. The first year was two extensions, and then last year we only had one extension. So this coming up year, the 2019 period, we're hoping for no extensions. We're hoping that the system will close down January 31st. So please get in your application before that deadline. And getting in your application also means paying the application fee. So if you submit it and you didn't pay your application fee and you get to us on February 2nd and say, I didn't pay the fee, you've missed the deadline. You have to wait till 2020. Once you submit your application, if you get an approval, which we hope that your application is successful, you'll also be invited to get back into the system to do what we call listing. That will also have a deadline associated with it. It's normally sometime during the summer. And these deadlines are not suggestions, they're deadlines. So if you missed a deadline, we have charities every year that missed a deadline. Sorry, apply again in the next year. So I just want to stress to you, once you get your approval, that's not it. We have charities we probably still have charities that contact us now, even though we're halfway through the solicitation period, to say, I don't see my name on the list. That's because they never completed the listing requirements. So just make sure that once you get your approval, yes, you're approved to participate in the program, there is an additional step, and that's what we call listing. This is the advisory statement. Basically, it just encourages you to tell the truth. Be honest in your application. We do verify certain parts of your application. If we determine that there are any false certifications or anything that you did that was not truthful, it will, of course, result in denial of your application and ability to participate in the program. And then it says more about fine or imprisonments, but that's, that it's been done, but of course, that's not what anyone wants. So required documents. So I mentioned before the two different application requirements, the full application versus the verification application. So each of you should know which group you fall in. That list was sent out a while ago, but if you don't know, once you go into the system to start your application, you'll quickly find out which group you're in. So for this year, being that this is the third year that we're doing the online application, and third year since all of the regulatory changes, we're in group 3 applicants are submitting full applications this year. So what that means is you're doing your certification statements, you're turning in an IRS Form 990, you're submitting financial statements, and you're also doing the areas of service. So it's the full application. If you're in groups 1 or 2, you submitted a full application previously, and this year you're only submitting a verification application. If you submitted a full application before and you were denied, your application was not approved, you're required to submit a full application again. If you change your membership type, you changed from, say, a member organization to an independent organization, you're required to submit a full application. If you submit your application type, so that means that you go from a local organization to a national international, or a national international to a local organization, you're required to submit a full application. So I'm just letting you know that because we do get those questions. I submitted a full application last year, why am I submitting a full application again? It's most likely because you were denied in the previous year or something about your application changed. So this table here just goes through the requirements of what which elements of the application are required for both the full application and the verification application, and those that are required for just the verification application. So now we'll get into the CFC system. Anyone new to the system? Completely new? Okay, so I will go over it. So this website address here, that's how to get to the charity application system. So again, any charity wishing to participate in the program must go to this website to establish an account and to submit their application. So for new users, what you would do is you would click Create an Account, and then you enter your name, your email address, and your password. You'll be prompted to enter answers to challenge questions. It's very important that you do that, because if you get locked out or forget your password, that's how your password is reset. So please make sure that you enter the answers to the challenge questions, and also keep in mind that the answers are case sensitive. If you're an existing user, it's easy. You would just enter your username and your password and you're in. So once you're logged in, if you're a new user or an existing user, you get taken to the your charities page. So on this page here, this is, first it shows you all the applications. If you're already an existing user, it shows you all of the applications that are under your accounts. So that's if you're an owner of the account or an editor of the application, and we'll talk about the differences between the two in a second. But you'll see all the applications that you can access on this page here. You can also search for those charities. So if you enter the CFC code, the EIN, or the name of the charity, you can see which accounts are assigned to you. So I always tell charities it's always best to search by CFC code and their employer identification number. Those are the two easiest ways to find your online record. The name, you might get a number of different results and have to do a lot of scrolling, but if you put in your EIN or your CFC code, it takes you right to it. So I mentioned before the box outlined in blue that shows you all of the applications that are assigned to you. So most of you won't have this many applications assigned to you. So unless you're a federation, if you're an independent organization or even a member, you'll probably have the one application. And the next column outlined in yellow that says role tells you what your user role is for that particular application. So let's say if you have multiple applications that you can access, the roles may be different. So on one application, you may be a owner, and on another one, you could be an editor. It also tells you the status of each application. So if it's in progress, if it's already submitted, it normally says in review. If it's a situation where it's after the determination process, it could say approved, it could say denied. If there's an application that you submitted an appeal for, it'll say in appeal. So this screen here just helps you manage the applications that are assigned to you, and it's a quick view of what the status of that application is. And then the last column is 2016 listing. So again, I mentioned that two-step process. So here you can determine if you've completed your listing. So we get a lot of emails and calls from charities asking us, well, did I complete my listing? You can find that right here. So most of the questions that we normally get are questions that if you logged into the system, you would be able to get that information on your own. The other two things that I want to point out, since we are approaching the beginning of the opening of the system, to start your application, you could do that right from this page. So outlined in yellow, you see starts an application in red. So you click that and it will bring up the form for you to start to enter your information. Or you could also start it by find your charity's name, and it will, in that third column, you see where it says start an application. You can also start it that way. So a couple of different ways that you can start your application.
Can I ask a quick question? Will the system know if we're a full application?
Yes, yes. So the other thing I wanted to point out before we get too deep into what you're here for is just the different functionality of the interface. So this here, the home page, so at the top of the screen, you'll see your name with a drop-down arrow. Go back here. So from here, you can go to your home page, you could go to access, you could go to settings, help, or to log out to the system. So I'll briefly go over each one of those so you'll know. So the home takes you to your charities page, which we just talked about. And then the access shows your charity access invitations and requests. So we'll talk about that shortly. Settings, you can change your user settings, your password, your name if it changes. Challenge questions, any information that you use to register for your accounts. You can change that all here. The next one is help, which is very important. So there is a help feature in the system. So again, we get a lot of questions that if you did a search on the website, it would actually generate a response for you. So we do have a lot of FAQs already in the system, so please utilize the FAQs. And then to log out. So if you click out of the system, it's just, I don't think it breaks anything, but if you can log out. This is the way that you can log out. So this is the access menu that I mentioned before. So this page here, so we talked about the different roles. So if you've requested access to a particular application, you've emailed your coworkers, say for instance, that you have responsibilities for part of the CFC application and you want to get in there to complete that task, you can send an email to whoever is an owner of the application to say, hey, give me access to this application. Or you can send someone access to say, hey, I need you to do this particular part of the application, so I'm assigning you as an editor. So on this page, you'll be able to see any pending requests of what you've requested or what was sent to you. This is a settings page that I talked about, the FAQs. So there's a search. At the very top, you'll see FAQ and search. So if you do different keywords, say for instance, listing fee, if you were to type that in there, it'll bring up an explanation of the listing fees. If you brought up deadline, it would bring that up. So we have a lot of FAQs already in the system for your benefits. So user roles, so I've talked about that a lot. So there are two different roles. There's a charity owner and then the charity editor. You're not restricted on the number of owners or editors that you can have assigned to an application. You can have 10, you can have 15. I always say have more than one. For the owner, you're required to have at least one. And then you can have editors, but I always encourage you to have more than one individual, more than one person at your organization that has access to this application, because when we send out correspondence to charities, we send it to the email on file and we consider it sent when we send it. So if that person leaves, if that person is on maternity leave, if whatever the case may be, we're not responsible if the message is not received before the deadline. And every year we get people to say the person left or, they're on vacation. Please, can we pay our application fee late? Can we pay our listing fee late? we have deadlines for reasons. So please put multiple individuals assigned to the application. So if you're out on leave or whatever the case may be, someone will be able to get that email. And just to show you an example of how quickly the workforce changes, I believe we sent out the information for this training at the beginning of November. So you were able to start signing up, registering for the training then. When we sent out the notification yesterday with the details of how to access the training in person or via web, we got a lot of bounce backs. People who had already left the organization in less than a month. So it's a reality. So the difference between the two, an owner has full rights to the application. They could do everything that we'll talk about today. They can perform user management, they can see disbursement information, they can enter banking account information, they can manage affiliations. So managing affiliations means they can change, say for instance, their membership type from a independent to a member or in any direction. An editor is granted rights by the owner, and they're restricted on what they can do. They can still see disbursement information, but they cannot see the full banking account information. So they can only see the last 4 digits of the banking information. They do not perform user management, so they can't invite other editors or other owners. Only the owner can do that. But again, you can have more than one editor. So to add a user, this page goes over that. So I sent the PDF of the slides to everyone prior to this. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about this because we have other things that you need to hear today, but this gives you instructions on how to add a user, how to request access to an existing charity, how to request access if it's a new charity. So that has a couple of more steps. So if it's a charity that's not in our system, so new, not a new organization, but new in terms of being in the system, you would need to add that charity into the system. And these next slides go over how to do that. So you would enter the organization's EIN name, organization name, the address, and P.O. boxes are not acceptable. So for the organization's address, you have to use a physical address. So not a UPS store, USPS store, mailboxes, etc. It has to be a physical address that if a federal donor wanted to go to your organization to see, let's see if this organization is actually doing what they claim to do, they would be able to see some type of activity. And they could also look at your 990, look at your federal financial statement. So it has to be a physical location where a donor can visit. Can we hold questions until the end, just because, again, we're short on time and I do have a hard stop time. So once you add a charity, you will be generated a CFC code. Please make sure that you write that code down and that you keep it. So whenever you call us or email us for assistance, always give us your CFC code or your EIN number. That is the fastest way that we can help you. If you give us your organization's name, I've searched for organizations and I've had a really hard time finding them in the system because maybe it was set up as an acronym or I don't know. But if you give us your CFC code or your EIN, we can pull you up. We could definitely pull you up. The other thing is also when you enter your information, make sure that you enter it in correctly. So things like EIN, it's a 9-digit number. We have charities that enter at 8 digits or 7 digits, or they transpose the numbers and then the EIN number is incorrect, and then we end up having to deny you because your information doesn't match up with what's in the IRS business master file. And it sounds like a simple fix where, okay, we'll just switch it to the correct number. It's actually not a quick fix. And we've had situations where we were approaching the deadline to get this information fixed because we need to go to the system administrator to request those changes. So please be careful what you enter into the system. So on this page here, once you add the charity, it will ask you to verify the information that you enter. So again, you do have an opportunity to verify your information. What's happening here? Okay. So on this page here, this is how you would start your charity application. So if you are a charity that applied last year, the system will tell you this is the choice that you selected last year. So if you applied as an independent, it will say that. If you applied as a member, it would say that. If you applied as a federation, it would say that. Be careful with selecting federation. We have organizations that select federation because they say, well, we have more than one office, so I think we're a federation. You're not a federation. If you're a federation, most likely you know that you're a federation. So just to use an example, Girl Scouts, they have a lot of offices across the country, but they're not a federation. American Cancer, they have a lot of offices. They're not a federation. So if you are a federation, it's because, one, you know that you're a federation for sure, and two, you're submitting your application plus at least 15 other member applications with yours, plus all of their application fees. So if you're only responsible for your one application, you're either a member or an independent. And if you're a member, most likely your federation is taking care of that for you. So just keep that in mind because we've taken a lot of effort to reverse how organizations have applied in the past. And again, these aren't quick fixes, but moving forward, we're in year 3. Again, we want to get to the business of quickly reviewing your application, making sure that we can notify you that you're accepted and issue out the final list. So doing things like having to correct how people apply, those things just kind of slow down the process. Can you go back one? To step 1. Oh. Okay, well, just go back to where it says if you're missing information. There, okay. So as you begin your application and you start to enter your information, if the information is required for you, because again, we've already talked about the full application versus the verification application. If the information or the documents is required and you do not submit it or upload it, it will tell you you are missing the following information. Please pay attention to that. And if you're missing information, please submit it because not submitting the information will result in your application being denied. So please look for those messages and go back and fix whatever the issue is. Oh, thank you. So on this step here is the very first step of the application, which is easy. No one fails on this step. So this is where you enter your organization's information. You enter your name, your email address. There's a message there because, again, the whole issue with email addresses is a very serious issue. We have a lot of organizations that submit, pay their application fee, and then they miss an email. That's unfortunate. You've just paid and now you've missed a deadline and can't participate in the program. So we have messages in the system to encourage you to enter multiple email addresses. Please do so. Please make sure that you're also entering the full email address and the correct email address. We do have situations where people enter the wrong one. So instead of .com, it's CMO. That won't get to you. Or the charity doesn't put .com, .org. Again, it won't get to you. It bounces back to us. And we've considered it sent when we hit send. So just to keep, just to reiterate on that. Also make sure that you use a semicolon to separate the email addresses. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is a big deal when we go to send mass emails. Please don't do colons, hyphens, it's a semicolon. I'm sorry, stay on that page. So here for optional information is the website and the fax number. Here you can put a P.O. box address on this page on step 1. So for the organization's address, when you first establish the charity in the system, it has to be a physical address, but on step 1, you can do a P.O. box. Okay, go on. On step 2 of the application, this is where you would say what your application type is. So are you a local organization, national, international organization, or international? So I'll go over those types. So a local organization is an organization that is only applying to be listed on one charity list. So we have 36 zones. So there are 36 different charity lists. So if you're a national, international, or international organization, you would appear in all of those books. But if you're a local organization, you would only appear in the book in that particular zone. So if you're in National Capital Area, which is a DC location, and you're a local organization, you would only appear in that book. You wouldn't be in the Northern California book. However, because we are electronic now, we have a electronic pledging system. Electronically, a donor can find any charity that is approved to participate in the program. So if it's on paper, you're a little bit more limited, but just keep that in mind. So I know some organizations like to be listed in as many books as possible. If you wish to do that, you would need to submit applications for each zone that you're applying to, and that means an application fee and a listing fee. But if you're a national international organization, that means that you're an organization with a national international presence. That means that you provide services in at least 15 states or one foreign country. If you're an international organization, that means you've provided services in at least one country. And then here you would also say, if you're an independent organization, or if you're a member and which federation you belong to. So if you're a member organization, if you select that here, you would need to put your federation's parent code, and you would get that from the organization that is your parent. And then we also have the FSYA, FSYP, MWR organizations. Their applications are very different from the independents and the federation, the independents and member organizations, as well as the federations. They have a much shorter application. But these are organizations that are on military bases. So if you are a FSYA, FSYP, MWR organization and you need assistance with your application, just shoot us an email. We don't have a special session for those charities, but we will still assist you one-on-one. So step 3 of the application is where is the first certification statement of the application. So we have them throughout the remaining steps of the application, and you are required to certify to each one of these statements. They're not options. So this particular one trips up a lot of people. It basically is saying that you're an organization that provides health and welfare services. So a lot of animal charities, a lot of environmental organizations will say, well, we don't serve humans. We can't certify to this statement. Well, all 501c3 organizations should be able to certify to the statements, and not certifying to the statements will result in denial of your application. So please make sure that you read over the statements, that you feel comfortable with it, and if you wish to participate in the program, that you do certify to it. Step 4 of the application is the areas of service. So this is the part of the application that trips up a lot of people, because this is where you are required to document the services that you provide either locally, nationally, or internationally. So I'll quickly go over just like the different little check marks that you need to do in the system, and entering of information that you need to do, but spend a little bit more time talking about the types of things that we see where we would deny the application on this particular step. So here you would need to certify to a statement here. This basically, it's really small. Sorry about that. But basically it's saying that if you're a local organization, that you provided services in the local zone to which you're applying. If you're a national or international organization, you're certifying that you have provided services in at least 15 states or one foreign country. And if you're an international organization, you're certifying to providing services in at least one foreign country. This step is not required of all applicants. This is only for the full application. So if you're a verification application, you will see a message here that says you're submitting a verification application. This step is not required. Click next to go to the next step. If you are required to submit that, it will say you're submitting a full application, this step is required, something along those lines. Make sure that you certify to the statement, and then click Add Attachments to enter additional information. So this is how the schedule of services looks for local organizations. So here you basically verify your service address, and that normally is the same as the organization's address that you entered. If for some reason it's different, say for instance you're applying to a different zone than where your organization's address is located, you would just hit the second option, which is enter the service address, and you would do that there. On this page here, there are 3 different entry boxes to enter description of services. For the 2019 application, you will see entries for 2018, 2017, and 2016. Local organizations should only enter information for 2018. Local organizations, you are required to show that you provided services in the calendar year preceding the application year. So that would be 2018. So we're looking to see what you did in 2018. If you enter information in 2017 or 2016, that information will not be considered in terms of what services you provided. So please make sure for local organizations that you only provide services, only provide the descriptions for 2018. You can also add as many attachments as you want to, so you're not restricted in the number of this. But of course, we don't want to read 100 of these, so please be judicious in what you're entering. But if you wanted to tell us 3 different services that you provided in 2018, you can do that. You would just go back to that page, go back one, Gwen, and click Add Attachments. So for each one, you would hit Add Attachments. The service description is restricted to 256 characters. So a lot of people say, well, how can I describe everything that we do in 256 characters? Well, you're describing one thing that you do in 256 characters. And the next thing that you do, you would click Add Attachments and talk about that. And then the next thing you would talk about that. So for instance, if you're an organization that you provide housing and you have a soup kitchen, you're not required to describe it all in that one service description. You would talk about the housing program that you do, whatever that looks like. You would talk about that, save it, and then click Add Attachments, and then talk about the soup kitchen. You guys understand that? Even though you are allowed to add multiple attachment A's, you can't use that as a way to get around the 256 characters. So let's say you're really excited to talk about this one particular thing that you do, and you run out of characters. The system should stop you when you've hit 256 characters. You can't say, oh, I've run out of space, let me hit another Add Attachments and keep typing about this same description. That's not acceptable. So just make sure each one you fully talk about it. So what I see a lot from charities is a lot of information that we don't necessarily need. So for instance, we don't need to know when your organization was founded, or your executive director's name here. So those are things that you can do to save space. So if at the point that you've said, my organization was founded in 2009, and this is our mission statement, which is also not allowed, and we'll talk about that. And then you try to say what services you've actually provided, most likely you will hit that 256 characters limit. So again, just make sure that you take out some of those things that we don't necessarily need. We only need to know what you've done. Characters. So spaces, punctuation, yes, good question. And we'll get to that. So for national, international, again, it'll tell you if you're required to submit this step, the areas of service, and you would do the same thing here. So if you're a national, international organization and you're meeting this requirements based on states, we should see at least 15 entries here, at least 15 attachments. If you're meeting that requirement with a country, then we can see one. Because again, for national and international, it's either 15 states or one foreign country, and then international is one foreign country. For international, we won't count any services that you provided in states. So just keep that in mind. I always recommend to charities to enter more than the minimum, because as we look at these, if we look at the states that you've entered and we determine that one does not meet the requirement, now you've fallen under the minimum threshold. Now you're at 14. But if you were to say enter 18 and we determine that 3 of them don't meet the requirement, well, we have 15 others to choose from, 15 others that meet the requirements. So always try to do more than the 15. And if you're looking to qualify based on country, try to do more than the one country. The other thing to note is For national, and international organizations, remember when I talked about the 3 different entries? So for 2019, you will see entries for 2018, 2017, and 2016. It's for national, and international organizations. So because these organizations have a higher burden to meet, they have to show the services that they provided in at least 15 states or 1 foreign country. We do give up to 3 years for them to report the services that they provided. So the one caution here is make sure that you put something for the most recent year. So even though you have up to 3 years, let's say for instance you put all the services that you provided in 2017 or 2016. Well, the regulation states that you have to have provided services in the most recent year prior to the application year. So for the 2019 application year, you have to report something that you did in 2018. So for instance, if you're meeting the requirements based on states, even if just in 1 state you provided eligible services, we determined that they were eligible in 2018, the remaining 14 could be between 2017 and 2016 because you've showed us that at least in 2018 you did something. But you can't just, if you put just all 2017 and 2016 and we don't see what you did in 2018, your application will be denied. And again, for local organizations, we have to see what you did in 2018. We're not at all interested in what you did for in terms of for the CFC application and what you did in 2017 and 2016. We only need to see that most recent year.
So we don't have our 16 and 17 information in there. Can we add that now at this time?
I'm sorry, what? Well, I'm sorry because I did ask her to hold her question. Can you hold your question to the end? Thank you. So throughout this PowerPoint presentation and then the slides that should be waiting for you in your email, you'll see text in red and it will say completeness review check. So I should have mentioned that at the beginning. Prior to last year, the CFC used to do what we called a completeness review of your application. That's where we looked over your application to see if basic information was left out. We no longer do those checks. Those checks are very time consuming. We don't have the capacity. And quite honestly, for other federal applications or documents that you submit, the IRS doesn't do a completeness review check of your 990. So we no longer do those checks, but we do provide you with a completeness review checklist. And that checklist is very detailed in going through each step of the application and what's required. So please use that checklist. Right before you submit your application, you'll get a pop-up box that says something along the lines of downloading the checklist. Download the checklist, look at it, go through each question. This is how you submit successful applications, but we see too many applications. We probably have maybe about 10% of applications that fail each year. So that's based on the number that we get, that's about 1,000 applications each year. And we provide training, and we provide the checklist. Just please make sure that you do your due diligence to make sure that your application is complete before submitting it. So in this PowerPoint presentation, we do have verbiage here as reminders for you. So here it just kind of goes through each thing that you should look out for to make sure that before you submit your application that step is completed sufficiently. So as, for instance, so I talked about the calendar year 2018 for 2019. Make sure that if you're a local organization, you've provided that. It will also talk about the number of beneficiaries or the monetary value. So for each service description, you are required to say the number of beneficiaries that benefited from the service or the monetary value. And what I recommend to charities is if you have information on both, enter both. You don't have to do it either or. So in CFC regulations, there's something that we call de minimis services. So if in your service description you say we fed two homeless people in the DC area, most likely that particular service description would be determined to be de minimis. So we look at the number of beneficiaries or the monetary value. Those numbers are not published, so we can't tell you what that threshold is, but just be mindful that we do look to make sure that you are meeting a certain requirement. And if I'm reviewing an application and if you've put the number of beneficiaries and the monetary value, you might have served, say, only one individual, but then you say that to provide services to that one individual, it was $50,000. So I'll say, okay, well, they didn't meet the requirements based on the number of beneficiaries, but based on the monetary value, I find this to be sufficient, and I can accept this particular areas of service. So just keep that in mind as a recommendation. If you have the information on the number of beneficiaries and the monetary value, just enter them both. For the national, international, it goes through the same questions. It will ask you, did you provide the areas of service for at least 15 states or one foreign country? Make sure that you do that. So again, just look for those completeness review checks. Okay. The one thing I do want to note, Gwen, go back one. For the local organizations as well as for the national and international, there is a place where it asks for the organization's dedicated phone number. Please enter that information. This information is for donors, so please make sure that you enter that. Make sure that you certify to the statement. So I'm just trying to point out some of the things that we see in our reviews that cause us to deny applications. And also, as a note, in terms of the areas of service reviewing that, it is in the discretion of OPM to determine if something meets the requirements. So one of the things that we find is where an application might have been denied and the charity comes back and says, well, it shouldn't have been denied. You should accept this. Well, again, it's in the discretion of OPM. And the other thing is sampling does take place in some of the zones. I know here at OPM, we review the national, international, and international applications, and we do try to look at all of the applications, but in some of the other zones, we don't have control over that. So I mentioned that to say, if your application was denied and then another application was accepted, was approved, that's not a justification for why we should reverse our decision on your application, because maybe sampling took place and that application wasn't even looked at. If we look at your application, we will hold you to the standards in the regulations. So just keep that in mind. If you're an organization that is reporting services, what we call web-based services, so all of the services that you did were via web, the system doesn't accommodate for you to be able to to provide additional information that's required in the regs. In those circumstances, we'll reach out to you to say, we see that you provided web-based services, we need this additional information, and we'll give you a time frame for when you should get that information to us. Please make sure you do that. We've had charities that did not respond to that email and their application was denied. So for this completeness review check, it goes through some of the things that, some of the problem areas for the areas of service. So a mission statement, I mentioned that earlier. A mission statement is not an acceptable service description. So a mission statement is something that's aspirational, something that, just we hope to end homelessness. It does not tell us what you actually have done, because you might have you hope to do that, but you haven't done it. So please don't put mission statements on step 4, because that is a reason for a lot of denials. So normally we look for words like we provided, we served, we serviced, things that showed action. So if you say, we offer transitional housing, that does not say what you've actually have done. So again, look out for certain words like offer or we have these services available. That doesn't say what you've actually provided, who you actually served. So again, just look out for that. Broad descriptions of services. So we'll see service descriptions where it'll just say tutoring or meal service. Well, what does that mean? Who did you tutor? Additional information is needed. So you do have 256 characters, which is a limit, but it doesn't mean that you're limited to just putting 1 or 2 word answers. We should see a little bit more than that. And as a good practice, Gwen, go back 1, 2. Yes, here. So does the service description clearly state who received the service, what the service was, when it was delivered, and where it was delivered? Those are good things to do, to look out for, best practices in terms of developing your service description. So someone said, well, why would I say where it was delivered, because I'm applying to this zone? Obviously, it was in that zone. Well, some of our states are located in multiple zones. So as a way to make sure that you're applying to the correct zone, we do need to see where it was delivered, because it could be, if you just said California, well, we're in California. So now we don't know if you should be applying to the Northern California zone or to the Southern California zone. Repetitive narratives. So that's in CFC regulations. It's not something that Victoria doesn't like, but it says it in CFC regulations, that all of these actually say it in CFC regulations, that repetitive narratives are not allowed. So for instance, we see it a lot in national and international applications, not so much in locals, because technically all you need to show is that you provided the one service. But for national and international, you're having to show that if, in a lot of cases for at least 15 states. And the charity will say the exact same thing in each one of them. Well, we can't determine if you just did a cut and paste or if this is what you actually did. So just be mindful of that. So as an example I gave to someone was, and I know that this is tough for a lot of national, international organizations, because a lot of times you are doing the exact same thing in 15 different states or throughout the country. So if it's, we built houses for homeless people in Montana, so that's one. And then you would say what you did in Los Angeles or in Atlanta, Georgia. That insertion of the city or the location now has made it different. So we're not asking you to to spend a whole lot of time of figuring out how to say something 15 different ways. But if you took the effort to just enter, this is what we did in DC, this is what we did in Baltimore, this is what we did in Orlando, now it's not considered repetitive. Go back one. Listing of affiliated groups. So we see that sometimes where, again, you might have an organization that has relationships with other organizations, or you're an organization that has offices throughout the country and you just kind of just list everything, or you take credit for something that your office in Chicago did. You can't do that, because if you've applied and you've entered what Chicago did and then Chicago applied, now we're double counting services. So just make sure that you're reporting on what your organization did. And a lot of times that comes in the way of support. So it could be, funding. Your funding has helped an organization do something. We just need a little bit more than you just listing an organization. And then I've talked about the de minimis services. So there's information there. So there was a memo that we issued in October, I believe it was, that really goes into detail on how to complete the areas of service. I included that here, the link to it here in your PDF document that I sent out. You can access it straight from there or from the OPM website. Please look over that memo to just there are a lot of helpful examples. Just look over it as some of the things are, maybe best practices, and some of the things are just things that you should avoid. So please make sure that you avoid these things. I really hate seeing applications get denied, especially after you've paid an application fee. Step 5 of the application is the exemption status. So this is one of the steps that is not required of all applicants. It's required of full applications, and it will tell you. So the text in blue, you can't really see it that well, but just when you go to step 5 of your application, if you're in an organization that's a chapter or affiliate, it will say something along the lines of, we see, I can't even read it. We see that you're operating as a chapter affiliate, you should choose option 3. Or if you're an organization that is part of a group exemption, and again, these are those scenarios where there might be a larger organization that oversees your organization, or you're an organization that's related to a national organization. So that information we take from the IRS Business Master File. So this is how the IRS recognizes you. So if you see that messaging, you should choose that option, because again, this is information that's the system bounces information off of the IRS Business Master File. So any organization that might have lost their tax exempt status, we would know that. Maybe not quickly, but we'll figure it out eventually. So just keep that in mind for whatever option is suggested for you to select that option. If you're an organization that is not at all related to any other organization, you normally would choose option 1, which is we're a standalone organization, and that's how the IRS recognizes us. If you choose option 2 or 3, you are required to submit additional documentation on this step. So I'm actually going to correct something that I said. Choosing one of these options is required of all applicants. Submitting the additional documentation is only required if you're a group 3 applicant in 2019. If you're a full applicant, then you're having to submit additional documentation. So here, if you're a part of an organization that operates under a group exemption, you're required to submit a group exemption list, which is a listing of all the organizations that are part of that group exemption with their name and their EIN number. If you're an organization that operates as a part of as a chapter or affiliate, you have to submit a letter, we call it a CEO letter from the national organization, and it normally has to be signed by the CEO, executive director, someone very high level from that organization to say, yes, we know of this chapter. They are covered by our employer identification number. They're covered under our IRS Form 990 and our financial statements, and we approve of them applying for participation in the CFC. And that letter has to be signed and dated after, I believe it's October 1 of the year before the application period, so October 1, 2018. So the more recent the letter, the better. The next step is the IRS determination letter, which is not required of all applicants, only the ones submitting the full application. So normally in these cases, it would be an organization that's, say, new, recently got their 501c3 status, or maybe for some reason, maybe we just couldn't find them on the IRS business master file. Then in that case, you would be required to submit your IRS determination letter. And that is a requirement. If you're required to submit it, you have to submit it. Under that, it has your listing name. So in the charity list, have we all seen the charity list that the federal donors use to pick out charities? It can list you, well, it must list you with your legal name. That's a requirement. It has to list you under the legal name that the IRS knows you. But then there's an option to be listed with a listing name. So that is, my legal name is Victoria Taiwo, but as a CFC charity, I would like to be listed as Victoria's Charities, but I've gotten permission from my state organization that has given me the permission to use that doing business as name. So please make sure that if you submit a doing business as name, that you actually do have supporting documentation there. So we're not going to list you under any name that you wish to be listed just because you want that. We need to see some type of documentation that supports that. So if you're an organization that is part of a group exemption or a chapter or affiliate, although on step 5, you are not required, say if you're submitting a verification application, on step 5, you are not required to submit that documentation there. If you do wish to be listed with a different name, you would need to submit it on step 6. You would need to submit something that shows that you've gotten that permission. And here I should say that the listing name, submitting a request for a DBA name can be submitted with your application or during listing. Please submit it during the application phase. We have a lot of these to look over, and Gwen normally tackles that all by herself with a little help. So the earlier that you submit it to us, the better we are in terms of making sure that we look through all of these, because we can't issue the final list until we've looked at all the DBA name requests. We will look at it during listing, but it's better if you submit it with your application. And it's also better if you submit it with your application, because there's been some cases where, say your financial statements or your 990, the name doesn't match with what's on your application. That's a reason for your application to be denied. But if you submit that doing business as documentation, we would see, oh, well, this is their legal name, but they have a doing business as name, and that's what they put on their financial statements or their 990. So it's really better to submit it with your application. If you submit a doing business as name and we, for whatever reason, we don't accept it, maybe the documentation is outdated. So a lot of states will give that permission, but it's for a particular time frame. You know, there will be an expiration date on that document. We won't accept your use of that name, but that doesn't mean that you can't be listed. That just means that we'll list you with your legal name. So keep that in mind. We won't deny any applications because they requested to be listed as a particular name and we didn't approve that. We'll actually contact you and give you an opportunity to submit the correct documentation. Step 7 is the financial statements portion of the application. So this is only required, submitting the documentation is only required of applicants submitting full applications. All applicants have to certify to one of the statements. So so just to go over the 3 statements, the first statement basically says, our total revenue that's reported on our 990 is over $250,000. We're required to submit audited financial statements, to have prepared audited financial statements, and we do that. And it's in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles and generally accepted auditing standards, GAAP and GAS. And that I think something along the lines of we account for our funds on an accrual basis. So that's what the first one says. The second one says our total revenue is less than $250,000, but more than $100,000. So we either have audited financial statements or we have reviewed financial statements. So for organization selecting option 2, you can submit reviewed statements or audited financial statements. Under no circumstances do we accept compiled statements. So we get those questions and we get financial statements where it's some other form, something else other than audits or reviewed statements. Those are the only 2 that we accept. The third option is our total revenue is under $100,000, so we're not required to do an audit or reviewed financial statements, but we do account for our funds on an accrual basis. And we have certain, hold on. I think it's along the lines of we have controls in place to monitor our funds. So just make sure that you select one of the 3 statements. We do verify that you selected the correct statement based on your total revenue. So if you say, well, I don't want to submit audited financial statements or review statements, so I'll just select option 3. We do verify that, and then we'll deny your application, and then you'll need to submit your audits or your review statements. So honesty is always the best policy. And here it would just go over the requirements of those audits or those review statements. So the audits and the review statements, they have to be conducted by certified public accountants. They have to be signed. Make sure that they're signed and dated. We get a lot that are not dated. They also have to be for a period at least 18 months prior to the application year, so the application deadline. So the application deadline is January 31st, 2019. So that means your financial statements should be for a period on or after June 30th, 2017. So if you send us financial statements that are June 30th, 2016, 2015, May 31st, 2017, those statements are owed and we won't accept them. And the reason why I use May 31st, 2017, because it's really close to June 30th, right? It's owed. it has to be at least 18 months prior. So the magic date here is June 30th, 2017, and that date, that financial period has to be the same as what's on your IRS Form 990, which we'll discuss. So that's another reason why we see a lot of applications get denied. The fiscal periods are different. It has to be for the same fiscal period. If your application is denied for the 990 or the financial statements and you submit an appeal, and we'll talk about that, make sure that you keep that in mind when you submit the documents on appeal, because I see that a lot. We denied your application for whatever situation, and you submit you submit a 990. What happens a lot is the organization will submit the 990 because it's more recent, and the numbers look better in terms of their administrative fundraising rates. So they want to use that more favorable fundraising rates. Well, now the fiscal period is different than what was submitted for the audits. Now your application is getting denied. So just make sure that with your application or even on appeal, your 990 and the audit or the reviewed financial statements are for the same fiscal period. So for the 990, which is step 8, all organizations must complete this step. Full application or verification application. So even if you're an organization that's a chapter or affiliate, and I mentioned earlier that it might be in the CEO letter, it'll say something like, this organization is covered under our financial statements and IRS Form 990. You still have to submit a 990 for CFC purposes, and we call that the pro forma IRS Form 990. So it's something that you're doing only for the CFC. And it's not a particular form. It's the same form as you would submit if you were actually submitting it to the IRS, but you're only having to fill out certain parts of it. The 990EZ, PF, or N, or any other variation, we won't accept that. So please don't submit it. We get those every year. We won't submit it. We won't accept it. If you submit an EZ, PF, or N to the IRS, then you would complete the pro forma. If you're a church or a religious organization and you don't have to submit the IRS Form 990 to the IRS, you still have to do the pro forma for the IRS. If you tell us that, well, we're a church, we're a synagogue, we're not required to do this, well, for the CFC, you do have to do the pro forma. So a protest letter won't get you excused from doing this requirement. So one of the changes that we did this year was on step 8 of the application, we have downloadable forms of the IRS Form 990 on the website. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One is the system does scan the applications. And a lot of times when your accountant does your IRS Form 990 and you've copied it a couple of different times, now when our system goes to scan your document, it generates really bad results. So we've uploaded a version here that you can download, complete, save, and upload back to our system, which would be a much better version for the scanner to pick up. Another reason why we put it here is because with the pro forma, especially with the pro formas, we notice a lot of mistakes, even with the ones submitted to the IRS. And just so you know, if the IRS accepts your document, the IRS typically don't review these documents. We probably review more IRS Form 990s than the IRS. Just because you submitted it to the IRS and didn't get a letter back and no one knocked on your door, that doesn't mean that there were no errors. It doesn't mean that we should accept it. So just keep that in mind, because we get that in appeals a lot, where the charity will say, well, the IRS accepted it, so you should too. Not acceptable, and they don't participate. So, John, can you queue up that PDF? So what we did was we uploaded the IRS Form 990. We did two different versions of it. There's one for 2016 and one for 2017. So even if you're an organization that submitted your document to the IRS, still look at this, because the highlighted sections are the sections that we look at in the documents. So just make sure that those sections are completed and completed properly. And if you're submitting a pro forma IRS Form 990, you're submitting this document just for CFC purposes, definitely make sure that you complete anything that's highlighted in yellow. So can you scroll through this? We get a lot of these documents either submitted to the IRS or the pro formas that are not completed properly. Signatures, such a sad reason for your application to be denied. Very sad, because you didn't submit a signed IRS Form 990. If the IRS Form 990 is not signed, it's not a final document. We don't know if changes were made after it was supposedly submitted to the IRS. So that signature basically is we're not looking for the tax preparer's signature. We don't care that your tax preparer signed it, but we're looking at someone high level within your organization, the CEO, CFO, somebody signed it, and somebody is vouching that this document is complete and correct. So please sign it and date it. So, just throughout the document, you'll see highlighted parts of this 990. Make sure that you complete those parts. So that's one of the changes that we did to the system this year to hopefully decrease the number of denied applications that we see. Thanks, John. You can bring back up the PowerPoint. So I mentioned before the 990 has to be for the same fiscal period as the financial statements. So again, please make sure that you check for that. Make sure that the financial parts where it reports your total revenue, your general and management expenses, and your fundraising expenses, make sure that you complete that. We see a lot of those with missing information. We can't calculate your organization's administrative fundraising rates without that information. And that's a requirement to be listed in the CFC book. So what we see a lot, for various parts of the 990, we'll see organizations that leave things blank, and they come back and say, well, we left it blank because it's zero. Well, we can't determine if that's zero. If it's a zero, put a zero. So we can't determine a zero is not a blank response is not a response, and we do deny a lot for blank responses. So again, the completeness review check, make sure the name on the 990 is the same as what's on the financial statements, was the same as the name on the CFC application, on the IRS determination letter if required. Just make sure, and that the 990 and the financial statements, again, same name. Shouldn't be two completely different names. So step 9 is where we calculate your AFR. So we pull that information straight from your IRS Form 990. So again, can't calculate it if you didn't put a response there. Here's the formula that we use to calculate it. That is how we calculate it. If you think that there's a better formula to calculate your AFR, that's fine, but we won't accept it. You have to use this formula. And there's also a certification statement that you need to check. Step 10 is the governing body. This is where you report your board composition, and you get that information from your 990, and we check it on your 990. So this trips people up a lot. This step is not asking you the number of your voting members and the number of your trustees right now. Is asking you that number for the period of the IRS Form 990 that you submitted. So for instance, June 30th, 2017. How many voting members were reported on that IRS Form 990? How many trustees? I'm not asking how many voting members and trustees you have in January 2019. We're looking for what you reported on your 990. And there's also a certification statement here that needs to be checked. So on the 990, this is something that trips up a lot of charities, and we get a lot of, well, this is how my accountant has always done it, and it's not wrong. Well, a lot of times it is wrong, even though your accountants did it. And again, even though you've done it like this forever, we caught it, your application will be denied for that. So as you can see, Part 1, Line 3 is highlighted. That's your voting, the number of voting members. Make sure you enter something there. Has to be something. Can't be blank. Can't be zero. You have to have voting members because the CFC regulation says that you have to have an active board. So if you have zero, we see that in a lot of cases, application will be denied. So make sure that there's a number there. Next page. On this page here, Part 7 gets completed incorrectly a lot. So here on the first column, you list out all your board members, all your trustees. It also allows you an opportunity to list like your employees and other employees, but we're not looking for your employees. We're looking for your board members, your trustees here. And we need to see at least one person listed, right? So can't be blank, can't be zero. It has to be something. The third column under C, it says individual trustee or institutional trustee. And then it has officer, it has key employee, it has highest compensated employee, and then the last one, I really can't see that well. One of those first two columns need to be checked. That's how we determine who are the trustees. So what we see a lot is organizations listing someone and select an officer, which is that third sub-column. We don't consider that the officer position as a trustee. The IRS considers the officer as a high-level person at the organization. So a CFO, a CEO, an executive director, not a trustee, not a board member. To report your board member, again, it has to be one of those first two sub-columns. And I'm stressing this because we see this, we see this a lot where it's wrong. And you've paid an accountant, you've paid a bookkeeper, you paid someone to do this and it was wrong. And you submit it to us thinking it's right, but it's not. So that's how you would report your trustees. If you don't select one of those first two sub-columns, that little box there that I circled, not very well, but still a circle, you can check that box to say, it says, check this box if neither the organization nor any related organization compensated any current officer, director, or trustee. Actually, let me amend what I just said. So you still have to check one of those two sub-columns to say either they're an individual trustee or a trustee. That next column, columns D, E, and F, that's where you report any compensation received by the individual. So any compensation that they received from the organization itself or any related organization. So maybe someone that you partner with paid this individual. You would report it here. Can't be blank. If it's 0, put 0. And it has to be a 0 for each column. So, if you list me, Victoria Taiwo, then columns D through F, if it was 0, you put 0 for column D, 0 for E, 0 for F. So what we see a lot is we see charities, they might put a 0. If they put anything, they might put a 0 under E, or they might put it under F. Well, what happened in D? So make sure that you put it in D, E, or F. The exception to that is you check that box to say none of these individuals received compensation. If you list someone that received compensation and you check that box, now we don't know what you did. It looks like it's unclear to us. That's a reason for your application to be denied. So make sure, even if you already have your 990 and you look at it and you say, oh no, this is wrong, like they're gonna deny my application, calm down. If it was a document that you submitted to the IRS, all you need to do is amend it with the IRS and submit it to us. And if you amend it with the IRS on the very first page, go back to the first page, under B, on the left, on the far right-hand side, under check if applicable, it will say amended return. Just make sure you check amended return and then submit it to us. Well, submit it to the IRS and submit it to us. And again, we are able to verify that. Well, we see a lot of times where the charity might have made corrections on their 990, and then they submit it to us. We won't accept that. We'll deny the application, because if you've submitted a document to the IRS and made changes to it after, that's not acceptable. It has to be, the IRS has to have the same information that we have. So if you make any changes to it, make sure that you correct it. In the case of pro formas, that's different, because you're only doing those for the CFC. So you don't have to submit the pro forma to the IRS, even if you make changes to it. Okay. Step 11, really easy. More certification statements. Read those over. You just certify to each one. I don't think I've ever seen anyone fail for this, because you're just attesting that these statements are correct. So here's the application dashboard. So from here, you can edit your application, upload documents. So if on a particular step, say step 7, you didn't put your financial statements, you can upload your financial statements or your 990 here. You can view and add your users here, and you can sign and unsign your application here. Signing the application is required. There needs to be someone high level within the organization that's attested that the contents in the CFC application, that information is truthful and correct. They have to enter their name and their initials, save signature, and continue. You have to pay the application fee. So if you don't pay the application fee, we don't even get it for you to get it to review. So if you fill out everything and you think you're good, but you didn't submit the application, it won't even land in our queue. So make sure you complete your application and you pay your fee on or before the deadline, preferably before. So we see a lot of instances where people wait till the deadline and then they forget their password, or they have system issues that day and now they've missed their deadline and now they want extensions. We normally say, no, sorry, wait till next year. So please don't wait till January 31st. As I said before, we're hoping to not do an extension this year. So operate under, they're not giving extensions. I need to do it before January 31st. Here's the application and listing fees. That information, the new schedule was published and sent out in early November. That information is also on our website, I believe. Application and listing fees are both required. If you pay your application fee but don't come back and pay the listing fees, you don't get listed. And charities will ask us sometimes when they miss the deadline, well, I know who the donors are. If I send them an email and give them our CFC code, can they still donate to us? Well, you can either donate electronically or on paper. Electronically, they won't even be able to pull you up to be able to donate to you. And if we get a paper pledge card with your CFC number and you weren't approved to participate in that current year, we don't process that pledge card. So paying both fees, very important. It's unfortunate when I see organizations that did one half and then missed the deadline and didn't do the other half, and then they're out because these fees are not refundable. For independent organizations, you pay that via the website with credit card. The federations, I believe the way that it normally works is like the members submit their payments to their federations, and then the federation does one big payment for them. And because those fees are so high, most credit cards balances aren't that high. So in those cases, federations are the only ones allowed to do ACH payments. Everyone else must do a credit card payment. Editing the application. So for the first 2 years, if you submitted your application and it was in our review queue, you couldn't make any edits to it, even if it was before the application deadline. So sometimes someone would say, oh my goodness, I forgot I put a old IRS Form 990, can I update my documents? Once you sign the documents, it was final. We made the change because it really just didn't make sense to me. So now you can edit your application up until the application deadline. So if you submit your application and you realize that there's something that you forgot to do or whatever, you can go back in and edit your application. So that's a good change. To edit your application, you will need to unsign it. So you remove your name, your initials, you click remove signature, and then once you make your edits, you have to go back and sign it again. So please make sure you go back and sign it again. The charity home screen. So when you log into your screen, to your account, you'll see any applications that you've submitted, their status. You'll see listing information, whether or not you've completed listing. We get questions a lot. Did I complete listing? Look here, your dashboard. You can also see donations. So you'll see donations that were pledged to you in 2017. And so it goes back as far as 2017. Yeah, so 2017, 2018, then upcoming 2019. So anything before 2017, we didn't have this online system. You won't see it here, but if you're wanting to know how much has been pledged to you, even in real time, so this particular campaign that's going on right now, you can log into the system and see that. You don't have to call us to ask how much has been pledged to you. That information is here, so it gives you real-time information and transparency. So withdrawing an application, you could do that. You would do that from your dashboard. Please make sure that you think twice before doing that. If you withdraw your application and you've paid your fee, it's non-refundable. You don't get your money back. So the system also tells you that before you withdraw your application. It will say, are you sure you want to withdraw your application, because you don't get your money back. And still we have people withdraw their applications and then request a refund, or if your application is denied, you still don't get a refund because you still submitted your application, it was still reviewed. So please just make sure. That's why I really try to be as detailed as possible in this training to make sure that you have good information to submit successful applications, because I really do hate seeing denied applications because you don't get your money back. So on the application dashboard, you can verify if you've paid your application fee. So that little circle, that square in green, that shows if you've paid it. It'll say paid or unpaid. The red box is where I said you can upload documents if you forgot to do them before, or it will show if you uploaded the documents, it will show you there. The part below that says submission system, I do want to talk about this because it's important to talk about. So for each step of the application, it will list it out. And it would say, before it used to say complete or not complete something or incomplete, something like that. And when charities got denied, they would say, well, the system said it was complete, so why are you denying me? That's not what that means. It doesn't mean that you were all good on that particular step. All that meant was you submitted something on that particular step. So say, for instance, on the 990, it just says yes. Something was submitted. It could have been the Washington Post. It could have been anything. It does not mean that it was an acceptable document. It just means that something was submitted. But we changed the verbiage a little bit to not confuse people. So now it says review pending, or I think it still says incomplete. So to still let you know. So always check this section here. So if you see where it's the red, I think it's a red circle with an X, that means that something is missing there. Go back, see what's missing, complete it. If it says review pending, it means that you submitted something and a reviewer will look at it. A note of caution, if you complete an application but don't submit your application fee, it will still say review pending, but you didn't submit your application fee, so no one's gonna look at it. So just make sure that you've paid your fee to make sure that it lands in our queue so we can look at it. Eligibility decisions. So I mentioned the two-part entry. If you're approved, you'll get the notification that tells you that you're approved, and it'll give you information that you need to go back and enter, like your listing statements, which is required to be listed in the charity list. So if you've seen the charity list, it gives like a little blurb of what the charity, something from the charity. Make sure that's required. Your listing fee is required, and then some optional things. And then also your disbursement information. You definitely want to make sure that you enter that information, because that's how you get your money. So we have charities that don't enter their banking information. Well, we can't send you your money if you don't enter that information. So, and why would you want to forget that? I don't know. If you're denied, not all is lost. You do have an opportunity to appeal to the director of OPM. Your notification letter will let you know what you need to do to appeal. It has to be done via the system, the online system. Do not send us mail. If you send us your appeal in writing, we will send it right back to you, and you will possibly miss the deadline. So make sure, normally it's 10 calendar days from when we send the email. So please pay attention to that deadline. The facts are limited to, make sure your appeal is limited to the facts justifying reversal of your denial. So don't start talking about something else. Don't give us additional documentation. Submit your appeal in the formats that we requested it. Again, a very sad reason to get denied. Don't send us anything that was not previously available. So let's say, for instance, you got denied because your financial statements weren't ready. If your financial statements aren't ready and you don't have acceptable financial statements before the deadline, you probably shouldn't apply, because if you send it to us when that document is ready, but it's after the application deadline, and we look at the dates and we see it was completed February 15th, we're not reversing your denial during appeal. So make sure whatever you submit to us was available prior to the application deadline. Also, with the areas of service I mentioned before, that's a big reason why applications are denied. So if you did get denied, normally you start getting those notifications late spring, early summer. What I see sometimes, charities will start talking about what they did, say for instance in 2019. Well, we won't accept 2019 services. Make sure you still report, you know, within that 2018, 2017, 2016 if a national, international, or 2018 if a local. And the appeal decision is final. So we see that a lot. You get denied. You say, well, I want to appeal the appeal. No such thing. The appeal is final. Lastly, there's a video of a video of the top common application mistakes. Please watch that video. So I'm waiting for an update to our videos to kind of refresh it for 2019, but this is the one from 2018, so it's still applicable except for the very last mistake, which is that you cannot edit your application. I just told you that you can now, but everything else still applies. So you can still watch that, but hopefully within the next week or so, we'll have the updated pre-recorded training videos that we did. And another new thing that we did is for each step, you'll see a training video on that step. So if you get stuck on a particular step, you can just watch the video right there to make sure you have the information and make sure that you've submitted everything you need to submit so you can participate and get lots of money. And that is all. So right at 3:19 a minute, I know you had a question.
So when you said physical location that any donor can come to, we're a confidential location.
So that's the exception. If you're like a domestic violence shelter and you can't publicize we do understand that. So in that case, that is an exception.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the 256 character statement for step 4, are there any examples of that show like a really concise, because like I'm doing the math on that and that's like 25 to 30 words to
That's a lot.
everything that we, because like we haven't applied, we're in year 3, so obviously we did full. The last time we did a full one, it was like a couple of pages.
And that's what we don't want.
Excellent. You have no idea how happy you've just made me.
So look at that memo that I referenced because I think that there are some examples in there, but I've done a test. You know, I've typed out the descriptions and did a word count, and each time it was under 256 characters. So look at that document because it has some suggestions in there. But no, we do not want to read pages and pages of what you because we'll never get a list out. And getting the list out on time is important.
So the last fiscal year ended September 2017. So would
That would be acceptable.
okay, so the information that you're asking for the schedule of services for 2018?
So I thought you were talking about the financial statements and the 990. In that case, it would have been acceptable. When you talk about your schedule of services, do not report services based on the fiscal period. Make sure you report services based on a calendar year. So you would just say September 7th, 2017, but the minute that you say fiscal year, well, now I don't know if it was, sometime in 2016. And if you're a local organization or, well, maybe bad example. Let's say September 2018, you said fiscal year 2018. Well, now I don't know if it occurred in 2016 or 2017, which would not be acceptable for a local organization. So make sure that you report your services based on the calendar year. Do not say fiscal year.
And the question is for the group 3, so we're going to be inputting, I hope now, things that we did in 2016, 2017, and 2018.
You're national, international.
We're national.
Okay.
And we're gonna cover the 15 states. So will we be plugging that all in then per state? And that's what we did it
Yes.
before. We did per state.
So you would, for each state or country, you would click that add attachment and you would enter your information. And like I said, you're not restricted on the number, but we also don't want to see 50 of these or 100 of these. That's probably the best way to irritate me. So, you know, you could do multiple attachments for a state, multiple attachments even for a particular year. So you could do each one, but like I said, for national and international, we should see at least 15 states. And each state is its unique entry. So another thing that I see is we provided services in all 50 states, not acceptable. It has to be, you have to say what you did in Maryland, what you did in DC, what you did in Wisconsin, you can't just say what you did across the country or nationwide. We will reject the application for that reason.
What are the steps for the verification process? Like, which steps will I be?
All the certification statements, not in the 990.
Okay, so it's a lot shorter.
And wait, can I keep going or?
We're gonna need to take a break to switch over.
Okay, so I'll keep asking, well, maybe 2 minutes because I need to go to the bathroom before the next session. But if you're online, I'm sorry that we can't get to online questions during this training. Please send your email to cfc@opm.gov, and thank you very much for tuning in.